My next guest ran for president in the Democratic primary in 2020. Then he ran for New York City mayor in 2021, where he was the front runner for much of that race. And then he decided to leave the Democratic Party, and here he is explaining that decision.
Why leave the Democratic Party? I mean, you ran for president and mayor as a Democrat.
I've been a Democrat for 26 years, Anderson. Polarization is at record high levels in the United States. Political stress is approaching civil war levels. And the question is, how can we bring the temperature of the country down?
Let's bring in Andrew Yang. He's currently an independent and the Noble Mobile CEO. Andrew, it was very great to have you in studio. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, especially considering, you were a front runner for New York City mayor. We see this incoming Mamdani administration, and I saw some clips of you saying that he needs to curate relationships with big businesses, keep them here. He needs to assuage the concerns of Jewish voters. And likewise, he also needs to, you said, keep Tish. That's the NYPD commissioner. He said he's going to do that. I'm curious if you think he's doing those things and what you make of the Oval Office meeting.
I was thrilled at the tenor of this Oval Office meeting because one of the major pitfalls potentially for a mayor like Mamdani was getting crosswise with this administration, having resources pulled, having ICE officials down, downtown and other parts of the city. And so the fact that Zoran and Donald Trump seem to be on the same page.
Okay, so just when you thought the classified documents case couldn't possibly get any worse for Trump, a secret recording from a closed-door meeting with his own legal team has been leaked to major news outlets and handed directly to prosecutors who are actively trying to convict him. This is an absolute disaster for Trump's defense, and there's really no way to sugarcoat how devastating this development is. We're talking about actual audio from a private strategy session where Trump and his lawyers were discussing how to handle the obstruction charges in the classified documents case. They were literally mapping out their entire defense strategy in what they thought was a confidential meeting protected by attorney-client privilege. They were talking about how to deal with the evidence against them. They were discussing the classified documents Trump was holding onto and how to explain that away. They were strategizing about their weaknesses and how to address them. And now prosecutors have all of it. Every single word, every strategy, every admission, every discussion of what they were worried about. The people who are actively trying to convict Trump now have a complete recording of his legal team's private discussions about exactly how they plan to beat the charges. You absolutely cannot make this stuff up. This is the kind of catastrophic development that completely destroys criminal defense cases and leaves defendants with virtually no path forward. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust headlines anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
And it was fascinating. This was 6 years ago, before I was even thinking about AI, and you had a word of warning of what AI could do to the country. I want to replay those remarks. This is 6 years ago, Andrew Yang.
I saw that we're pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom, and that for every 5, 10, 50 jobs that my entrepreneurs are going to create, we're going to lose 5, 10, 50,000 jobs. Bain says you're looking at between 20 and 30% of jobs subject to automation by 2030.
When prosecutors know exactly what your strategy is going to be before you even present it, when they can hear you and your lawyers discussing the weaknesses in your own case, when they have recordings of conversations that were supposed to be absolutely confidential and protected by the most fundamental privileges in our legal system, that's game over territory for any defendant. The recording leaked in early October 2025, and it immediately sent shockwaves through Trump's legal team and transformed the entire trajectory of the case. Reports indicate the audio captures extremely detailed discussions about specific strategies to handle obstruction charges, with Trump himself actively participating in the conversation and discussing document handling in ways that prosecutors are now using to completely tear apart his defense arguments. But here's where it gets even crazier and more devastating for Trump. One of the lawyers who was present at that meeting has now become a star witness for the prosecution. That's right, someone who was in the room, someone who was part of Trump's inner legal circle and trusted with his most sensitive defense strategies, has completely flipped and is now actively cooperating with prosecutors. This person is exposing internal strategy memos and providing testimony about everything they have access to from their time on Trump's legal team. This isn't just a leak anymore. This is a complete and total collapse of Trump's legal defense team from the inside out. When your own lawyers start turning on you and cooperating with the prosecutors trying to convict you, you know the situation has become truly desperate and potentially unrecoverable. Trump responded exactly how you'd expect him to respond based on years of watching him handle bad news. He went on Truth Social and immediately called it a Democrat hoax. He claimed it was all fabricated by his enemies. He insisted he did nothing wrong and that the whole thing was a witch hunt designed to interfere with his presidency. The usual playbook that he's been running since 2015. But here's the problem. The recording actually exists. Prosecutors have authenticated it and are using it in court proceedings. One of his own lawyers is now testifying under oath about what happened in those private meetings. This isn't a hoax that Trump can just wish away by posting angry messages on social media to his supporters. This is real evidence, devastating, authenticated, corroborated evidence that goes directly to the heart of whether Trump knowingly obstructed justice and willfully retained classified documents he knew perfectly well he wasn't supposed to have. And it connects directly to that other recording we talked about in detail, the Bedminster tape from 2021, where Trump openly admitted on audio that he couldn't declassify documents anymore because he wasn't president. Now we have another damning recording, this time of his legal team strategizing about how to defend against charges related to those exact same classified documents. The walls are closing in on Trump from every direction, and they're closing in fast. So let's break down what's actually in this leaked recording, how this catastrophic breach happened, and what it means for Trump's legal future and his presidency. Stick around because this is a big one. Alright, so let's really dig into what happened here, because the details of this leak and its aftermath reveal just how completely and catastrophically Trump's legal defense has collapsed from within. The recording comes from a closed-door meeting between Trump and his legal team that took place sometime in 2025 as they were actively preparing their defense strategy for the classified documents case being prosecuted by special counsel Jack Smith. These are exactly the kinds of meetings that are supposed to be protected by the absolute sanctity of attorney-client privilege, confidential communications between a client and their lawyers about legal strategy and case preparation that the opposing side should never under any circumstances be able to access. The entire point of that privilege, which is one of the oldest and most fundamental protections in our legal system, is to allow clients to be completely honest and candid with their lawyers about everything, and to allow lawyers to develop aggressive defense strategies without worrying that their discussions will be used against their clients. Courts take this privilege extremely seriously, precisely because effective legal representation depends on clients being able to speak freely with their attorneys. But something went terribly and catastrophically wrong within Trump's legal camp. Someone in that room recorded the meeting without authorization, and somehow, through means that aren't entirely clear from public reporting, that recording ended up in the hands of major news outlets and ultimately federal prosecutors by early October 2025. The leak occurred around October 8th or 9th, according to multiple reports, and its contents immediately became absolutely central to the ongoing trial proceedings. The audio reportedly captures incredibly detailed discussions about exactly how Trump's team planned to handle the obstruction charges that Jack Smith had brought. They were talking through their entire strategy for the case. They were talking about the evidence against them and how to counter it or explain it away. They were discussing their weaknesses and vulnerabilities and how to shore them up. And Trump himself was apparently actively participating in these discussions, including making specific statements about document handling that prosecutors have now seized upon to dramatically strengthen their case against him. Think carefully about what this means from a legal strategy perspective, because it's almost impossible to overstate how damaging this is. Prosecutors now essentially have Trump's complete playbook for the trial. They know exactly what arguments his lawyers were planning to make and in what order. They know what evidence his team was most worried about and how they plan to address it. They know what Trump himself said in private about the documents and the charges against him. Armed with all of that incredibly valuable information, prosecutors can prepare devastating responses to every single defense argument before it's even made in court. They can anticipate every move and have counter moves ready. They can use Trump's own words from the strategy session to undermine the arguments his lawyers make when they stand before the jury. It's exactly like playing poker when your opponent can see every single card in your hand. You're going to lose that hand every single time, no matter how skilled you are. There's simply no way to win when the other side knows everything you're planning before you do it. The source of the leak remains somewhat unclear in public reporting, but what happened in the aftermath is absolutely devastating for Trump's defense and represents a complete collapse of his legal team's integrity. One of the lawyers who was actually present at that confidential meeting has become a cooperating witness for the prosecution. This is extraordinary and almost entirely unprecedented in a criminal case of this magnitude and visibility. Defense attorneys are supposed to be the absolute last line of protection for a defendant facing criminal charges. They're supposed to maintain complete and total confidentiality about everything discussed during their representation. That's not just an ethical nicety, it's a fundamental requirement of the legal profession enforced by bar associations and courts alike. For a lawyer to flip on their own client and become a prosecution witness against that client represents a complete and catastrophic breakdown of the attorney-client relationship. This kind of thing only happens when a lawyer has concluded that continuing to protect the client would make them personally complicit in ongoing criminal conduct, or when the lawyer faces such serious legal exposure themselves that cooperation becomes their only viable option. Reports indicate this lawyer has now become a star witness for the prosecution, providing detailed testimony about what happened in those private strategy sessions and exposing internal memos and documents that will otherwise be completely protected by attorney-client privilege. The legal implications of this development are genuinely enormous and could reshape how Trump's entire defense proceeds. Attorney-client privilege can be pierced in certain limited circumstances, most notably when the communications involve planning ongoing or future crimes rather than just discussing past events that have already occurred. This is called the crime fraud exception to privilege, and if prosecutors can establish that the strategy discussions in that meeting cross the line from legitimate defense planning into actual obstruction of justice or other ongoing criminal conduct, then the privilege protections fall away entirely and everything that was discussed becomes fair game as evidence against Trump. That appears to be exactly what's happening in this case based on the reports about how prosecutors are using the recording. The content of the recording itself reportedly includes discussions that directly undermine Trump's core defense arguments in the classified documents case. Remember, Trump's lawyers have been arguing throughout the case that he didn't willfully or knowingly retain classified documents, that he genuinely believed everything was properly declassified through his presidential powers, that there was absolutely no intent to obstruct justice or impede the investigation. Those arguments required the jury to believe that Trump was confused or mistaken about the classification status of documents and the legal requirements for handling them. But if this recording shows Trump and his lawyers discussing how to handle evidence they clearly knew was problematic, strategizing about how to explain away clearly improper document retention that they understood was illegal, or coordinating stories about what happened that they knew were inconsistent with the facts, all of that goes directly to proving willfulness and intent beyond any reasonable doubt. Prosecutors don't have to rely on circumstantial evidence and inferences anymore. They now have Trump's own legal team, in their own words, discussing the very criminal conduct that's charged in the indictment. So let's break this down into what you really need to understand about this leaked recording and what it means for Trump's legal situation and the broader political landscape heading into 2026. Because this is a genuine crisis for Trump's defense that goes far beyond just one more piece of damaging evidence being added to the pile. First point, this leak represents a catastrophic and unprecedented breach of attorney-client privilege that suggests something went very seriously wrong within Trump's legal team at the most fundamental level. Lawyers don't just randomly record confidential strategy sessions with their clients and leak them to the press and federal prosecutors. That's career-ending professional misconduct that would result in disbarment, potential criminal charges against the lawyer involved, and civil liability for malpractice. These are the most serious professional consequences any lawyer can face. For something like this to happen, there had to be an extraordinary breakdown. Either a lawyer who concluded that continuing to protect Trump would make them complicit in serious ongoing crimes, or internal conflicts within the legal team that became so severe, someone felt compelled to go rogue, or perhaps sustain law enforcement pressure that convinced someone to cooperate in exchange for leniency on their own legal exposure. Whatever the underlying cause of this breach, the effect on Trump's defense is absolutely devastating and potentially unrecoverable. Trump can no longer trust that his communications with his legal team are confidential and protected. He can no longer be fully candid with his lawyers about the facts of his case without worrying that everything he says will end up in prosecutors' hands and be used against him. He can no longer develop defense strategy, knowing that strategy will remain secret until presented in court. The fundamental attorney-client relationship that criminal defendants absolutely depend on for effective representation has been completely shattered. How exactly do you mount an effective legal defense when you can't even trust your own lawyers not to turn on you? How do you prepare for trial when the other side literally has recordings of your private strategy sessions? Trump's legal situation was already extremely dire before this leak occurred. Now it's approaching genuinely impossible to overcome. The lawyer who flipped and became a prosecution witness represents an even more serious and ongoing problem than just the leaked recording itself. This isn't simply someone who leaked a recording and then disappeared from the case. This is a person with detailed inside knowledge of every aspect of Trump's legal strategy, his private statements about the case over months of preparation, internal memos and strategy documents, conversations about evidence and how to handle it. All of it is now available to prosecutors. This former defense team member is now actively testifying for the prosecution, providing detailed context for the recording, explaining exactly what was discussed and what it really meant, exposing the complete inner workings of Trump's defense. Every strategy decision, every private admission, every discussion of problematic evidence, every conversation about how to present facts in the best possible light is now potentially available to prosecutors through this cooperating witness. The defense has been completely and utterly compromised from within in ways that cannot be fixed or overcome. Second point, This recording directly and powerfully strengthens the prosecution's case on the key legal elements they need to prove to secure a conviction: willfulness and intent. The classified documents case has always fundamentally hinged on whether Trump knowingly and willfully retained documents he understood were classified and whether he intentionally obstructed legitimate efforts by the government to recover them. Those are the elements that separate serious criminal conduct deserving of punishment from innocent mistakes or misunderstandings that don't warrant prosecution. Trump's entire defense has been strategically built around creating doubt about his state of mind, arguing through various theories that he didn't really understand the classification status of the documents in his possession, that he genuinely believed everything was properly declassified through his exercise of presidential powers, that any obstruction of the investigation was completely unintentional and the result of confusion rather than criminal intent. The leaked recording from the strategy session potentially blows all of those defense arguments completely up. If it shows Trump and his lawyers discussing how to handle evidence they clearly knew was problematic and incriminating, strategizing in detail about how to explain away clearly improper and illegal conduct, or coordinating defense narratives they knew were inconsistent with the actual facts of what happened, that directly and powerfully proves willfulness and intent, prosecutors can now stand before the jury and make a devastating argument. Don't just take our word for what Trump intended and what he knew. Listen to his own legal team in their own private strategy session discussing how to deal with the classified documents they all knew he wasn't supposed to have. Listen to them strategizing in detail about how to handle obstruction charges because they clearly knew obstruction had actually occurred. Listen to them mapping out defenses they knew were inconsistent with the truth of what happened. That's not us prosecutors characterizing what Trump was thinking based on inferences. That's Trump's own trusted legal team captured on tape, confirming exactly what we've been telling you throughout this trial. The persuasive power of that argument before a jury is genuinely enormous and potentially case deciding. It takes the prosecution's entire theory of the case and validates it completely with evidence from inside Trump's own inner circle. Combined with the Bedminster recording from 2021, where Trump openly admitted on tape that he couldn't declassify documents anymore because his presidency had ended, prosecutors now have two separate devastating audio recordings that together tell a complete and damning story of deliberate criminal conduct. The first recording shows Trump knew he had classified documents he couldn't legally declassify after leaving office. The second recording shows him and his lawyers strategizing about how to defend against criminal charges arising from that exact conduct. It's a 1-2 punch that leaves virtually no room for reasonable doubt about Trump's knowledge and intent. The jury has already heard Trump admit on the Bedminster recording that the documents were classified and he couldn't change that fact. Now they're potentially going to hear his own legal team discussing in detail how to handle the legal consequences of that fact. What possible defense is even left at that point? Third point, this leak exposes the serious chaos and dysfunction within Trump's legal team that has been rumored for many months, but is now undeniably on display for everyone to see. Effective criminal defense requires absolute trust between attorneys and their clients, seamless coordination and communication among all members of the defense team, and complete confidentiality about strategy and internal discussions. None of that apparently exists in Trump's defense anymore after this devastating breach. You have lawyers recording confidential strategy meetings without authorization. You have lawyers flipping and becoming star prosecution witnesses against their own former client. You have internal defense strategy being completely exposed to the very prosecutors trying to convict your client. This is exactly what a legal defense in complete and total collapse looks like, and it raises genuinely serious questions about whether Trump can even receive the effective assistance of counsel going forward that criminal defendants are constitutionally entitled to under the Sixth Amendment. The dysfunction clearly isn't limited to just this particular leak. Throughout the classified documents case and Trump's various other ongoing legal battles, there have been constant credible reports of infighting among his lawyers, fundamental disagreements about defense strategy, attorneys abruptly leaving the team under mysterious circumstances, and serious questions about whether some lawyers are more focused on protecting themselves from legal exposure than effectively protecting their client. That's the chaotic and dysfunctional environment that ultimately produced this catastrophic leak. When a legal team is this dysfunctional and riven by internal conflicts, serious mistakes happen, trust breaks down completely, and people start looking out for their own interests rather than their clients' interests. One of those people apparently decided that cooperating with federal prosecutors was preferable to potentially going down with the Trump ship. Others may follow that same path as the legal pressure continues to intensify and the case moves toward its conclusion. Fourth point, the political implications of this leak extend well beyond just the classified documents case and significantly affect Trump's presidency and Republican prospects in the 2026 midterm elections. Every new piece of evidence showing Trump engaged in deliberate criminal conduct undermines his ability to govern effectively and damages Republican candidates across the country who are tied to him. Trump can't focus effectively on his policy agenda when he's dealing with crisis after crisis in his various legal cases. Republican candidates can't effectively campaign on their preferred messages when they're constantly being asked by reporters to respond to the latest Trump scandal and evidence of wrongdoing, and voters across the country are watching all of this unfold in real time, forming opinions about whether this administration is fit to govern and whether Republicans who support Trump share responsibility for his conduct. The leak also feeds directly into the broader narrative we've been tracking about an administration that operates completely outside the rule of law and will do absolutely anything to avoid accountability for wrongdoing. We have Attorney General Pam Bondi allegedly destroying evidence after a court ordered her to produce it. We have Speaker Mike Johnson caught manipulating congressional seating procedures to block Epstein transparency. We have Trump's executive orders being struck down as unconstitutional overreach by court after court. We have articles of impeachment pending citing obstruction of justice and abuse of power. And now we have recordings of Trump's own legal team strategizing in detail about how to handle obstruction charges in a case involving classified national security documents. The pattern is completely undeniable at this point to anyone paying attention. This is an administration that treats legal constraints as obstacles to be evaded rather than legitimate rules to be followed. Democrats are going to use all of this material relentlessly in their 2026 campaign messaging. They don't have to make up attacks or exaggerate what's happening. They just have to point accurately to what's actually occurring. The recordings, the leaks, the flipped lawyers, the evidence destruction, the court rulings, the judicial rebukes, all of it documented in the public record. The case against Trump and his administration is being made by Trump and his administration through their own conduct and their own words on tape. So where does this leave us as this case moves forward? We have a secret recording of Trump's private legal strategy session, now authenticated and in the hands of prosecutors and the press. We have one of Trump's own lawyers turned prosecution witness exposing internal strategies and confidential documents. We have Trump's defense completely compromised from within, with prosecutors knowing every argument and counter-argument before trial. We have this devastating new recording connecting directly to the Bedminster tape, where Trump admitted he couldn't declassify documents after leaving office. We have a legal team in complete disarray, with trust shattered and dysfunction on full display for the world to see. And we have all of this feeding into a broader narrative of lawlessness and obstruction that threatens to define Trump's presidency and seriously damage Republican prospects in 2026. Trump called this leak a Democrat hoax, but the evidence overwhelmingly says otherwise. The recording is real and authenticated. The cooperating witness is real and testifying. The damage to his defense is real and potentially irreparable. And no amount of angry social media posts to his supporters changes any of those stubborn facts. The walls are closing in on Trump in ways that even his most devoted supporters can plainly see if they're willing to look honestly at the evidence. How he escapes this particular legal trap is genuinely unclear because the evidence is so damaging and comes from such an unimpeachable source. His own legal team's private strategy discussions captured on tape. Keep watching because this story is going to continue developing rapidly as trial proceedings move forward and as we learn more about what's actually on that recording and what the cooperating lawyer is telling prosecutors behind closed doors. Stay tuned.